2012 was a wild year for movies. Seriously, on one hand, you had massive hits. The Avengers breaking records, The Dark Knight Rises dominating theaters, and Spider-Man swinging back onto the big screen with a brand new face. But while some movies were making insane money, others were crashing just as hard. And 2012 ended up being one of the biggest years for box office disasters. Two films stood out the most: Battleship and John Carter. And today we're talking about John Carter, a movie that honestly wasn't perfect, but definitely didn't deserve to fail this badly. At the time, John Carter was considered one of the biggest box office flops in movie history. Depending on who you ask, Disney lost somewhere between $200 and $300 million on this thing. Yeah, that's not a typo, but here's the interesting part. The movie itself isn't nearly as terrible as people remember. The real problem? Marketing. Or more specifically, a complete misunderstanding of how to sell this movie. Some people didn't know what they were doing, and others just didn't seem to care enough to fix it. Now, originally, Disney wanted Robert Zemeckis to direct the film. The guy behind Forrest Gump and Back to the Future. Sounds like a safe bet, right? Well, not really. Zemeckis turned it down. No amount of money or persuasion could convince him, and his reasoning was actually pretty brutal. He believed the original story by Edgar Rice Burroughs had already been copied so many times that it just wouldn't feel fresh anymore. In his opinion, movies like Star Wars had already taken everything that made John Carter special. After that, Disney tried other big-name directors, including Steven Spielberg. But some didn't have time, and others just didn't want to touch the project. And at this point, John Carter was dangerously close to being shelved. Again. Because this wasn't the first time. This project had been stuck in development hell for decades. Literally since the 1930s. At one point, it was even supposed to become the first full-length animated movie ever made. But the budget was way too high for that time, and the whole thing collapsed. So yeah, history was about to repeat itself until Pixar stepped in. And this is where things get interesting. Pixar, the studio behind Finding Nemo and Wall-E, offered not just to help produce the film, but also brought in their director, Andrew Stanton. Now, Stanton was a genius in animation, but he had zero experience directing live-action movies. And somehow, Disney said yes. Even better, they gave him a $250 million budget. What could possibly go wrong? That budget would later cost Disney executive Rich Ross his job. He claimed that he didn't approve the project originally, but he admitted that letting it get that expensive was on him. And honestly, fair enough. Now, a lot of people in Hollywood believe that Stanton himself played a major role in the film's failure. And to his credit, he agrees. He later admitted that giving him full creative control was probably a mistake. He had total freedom, and instead of helping, it kind of got to his head. Some of the decisions he made just didn't work. In his own words, he needed someone from the studio to step in and say no when things were going too far. One of those decisions? Casting. Instead of hiring a big movie star, Stanton chose relatively unknown actors. Disney actually suggested going with a major name, but he pushed back, insisting the movie didn't need it. He ended up choosing between Josh Duhamel and Taylor Kitsch. And looking back, Duhamel probably dodged a bullet there. To be fair, Kitsch wasn't a bad actor. In fact, he had just come off the popular TV show Friday Night Lights and looked like a rising star. But then he landed leading roles in not one but two massive blockbusters, John Carter and Battleship. And both of them flopped. Hard. If those movies had succeeded, he might have become a huge Hollywood star. Instead, it went the exact opposite way. What's funny is that the actual filming of John Carter went pretty smoothly. No major drama, no disasters on set. Everything fell apart later during marketing, and again, Stanton was in charge. One of his big ideas was to remove any mention of Edgar Rice Burroughs from the marketing. He didn't want the movie to rely on the author's name. He also chose not to focus on the romantic storyline in the trailers and ads, and that decision got heavily criticized later. Because guess what? That could have attracted a female audience. Instead, a lot of people just looked at the trailers and thought, oh, it's another Conan-style action movie, and skipped it. Then there's the title. Originally, the movie was supposed to be called John Carter of Mars, which at least tells you something about the movie, right? but Stanton decided to drop Of Mars at the last second. His reasoning? The story is about the character's journey, and that title only makes sense later. Artistically, sure, maybe, but from a marketing perspective, probably not the best move, and it gets even worse. According to people who worked on the film, Stanton personally approved the trailers and posters that tested the worst with audiences. Yeah, the worst ones. At that point, you almost can't make this up. So what happened at the box office? In the US, this $250 million movie made just $73 million. Worldwide, it added about $200 million more. And even that wasn't enough to recover even half of its cost. This wasn't just a flop. This was a disaster. And the consequences hit hard. Taylor Kitsch's career took a massive blow. After 2 back-to-back failures, he basically disappeared from leading roles for years. He showed up in smaller parts, like in Lone Survivor, and later tried to bounce back with True Detective Season 2. According to him, before that show, he had no offers at all and was struggling personally. Meanwhile, Andrew Stanton actually recovered pretty well. He went back to Pixar and directed Finding Dory, which made over $1 billion worldwide. So, yeah, not the worst comeback. As for Disney, they immediately canceled plans for sequels. There were supposed to be at least 2 more John Carter movies. But after this failure, those plans were dead. A few years later, the rights to the story went back to the Edgar Rice Burroughs Company. They've talked about rebooting it multiple times, but let's be honest. After a failure like this, it's a tough sell. That was Frameback. Subscribe for more rewinds and see you on the next one.